Hi everyone, I hope you're keeping well and safe. Um, this is continuation from previous session, so I will call this as session 2. And this session is going to be about first assessment criterion, which I'm going to read out to you so you know exactly what it is. So the unit is obviously biological psychology or biopsychology of stress. Okay, so the criterion is 1.1 and it reads: identify structures of the mammalian brain and the location of different functions in different parts of the brain. So what that basically means is that we will be looking at mammalian brain and we'll be looking at human brain. There are many mammals, as you know, but we don't have the time to look at other mammals, and it's kind of natural to focus on human brain. So in other words, the criterion is looking at identify different structures of the human brain and locations of different parts of the brain and various functions of those different parts of the brain. Okay, so the assessment criterion is very broad. It doesn't specify any particular um, uh, part of the brain. So that means you can literally, in your assignment, write about or mention any type of part of the brain. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you as much detail as I possibly can, like a big overview of the brain itself. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the brain, and I'm going to give you an introduction into the brain as a whole and kind of on the surface. Okay, and I will mention some parts of the brain, but what you'll be able to do then is take that information away and you can focus on any particular part of the brain that you like in your assignment, and you can go deeper into those particular parts of the brain. So you will be mentioning the names, the location where they are in the brain, and what their functions are. So, for example, you can talk about amygdala. You would mention where it is, and you would mention what function it serves. In other words, what it's used for. You could mention thalamus or hypothalamus, longitudinal fissure. You can talk about different lobes of the brain. So it's entirely up to you. Okay, because the assessment criterion doesn't specify which particular part or structure of the brain you need to focus on. Okay, so as a little introduction, um, there are many systems. I'm also using this. I'm also using a PowerPoint just to read some information to you to give you a little bit more detailed information. The PowerPoint I'm looking at is already on Moodle, and I also emailed it to you, and it's titled as Biopsychology PowerPoint. Okay, so there are many different systems of the human body. So there are systems such as respiratory system, um, muscular system, circulatory system, skeletal system, endocrine system, digestive system, and nervous system. So the one that we will focus on and the one that makes up this unit is the nervous system. Okay, so nervous system is very large. It's a massive, huge entity. Okay, and um, I'm just going to read out some extra information to you. Okay, so the nervous system is split into other systems or subsystems. So if you look at it this way, you have the term nervous system right at the top. So that's like an umbrella. Okay, and it branches out into different types of systems. Okay, so subsystems. So the one that we will focus on is nervous system, and the nervous system, I'm just going to read this out to you. The nervous system of the human body is highly complex. It's more complex than any other earthly creature, alive or extinct. This section focuses on the structure and functions of the nervous system. Structures such as neurons, axons, and synapses are described and their function outlined. So that's further in the PowerPoint, which I'm not going to focus on right now. Although nervous system is a whole entity of the human body and the brain, it can be divided up into the central nervous system, or CNS, also known as, and by the way, you can use these abbreviations in your assignment. So the first time when you mention it, you would say central nervous system, and then you would go, you can mention, you can say CNS. So the central nervous system is one part of the nervous system, and this is the center of the human operations. The other type, or the other part, is called peripheral nervous system, or PNS. This is the name. The name implies that it is the remainder or around the edges. In other words, is the rest of the nervous system. So the main one is the central nervous system. The central nervous system is also made up of the brain and the spinal cord. Okay? Neuroscientists divide the nervous system into two components, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system, so this is the one I'm going to focus on. The central nervous system, or CNS, okay, is comprised of the brain and spinal cord. And that's the one that we're looking at in more detail, okay? So, because the central nervous system is split into the brain and spinal cord, I will focus now mainly on the brain and not the spinal cord. You can mention spinal cord briefly in your assignment as well, but don't waste too much time on that because it's not a requirement. It's not a requirement for your assignment, and it doesn't mention that in the assessment criterion 1.1. Okay, so because we're looking at the brain, so just going back to what I said earlier, it's part of the CNS, or central nervous system. I'm going to now give you an overview of the brain. The brain has many different parts. Okay, so if we look on the surface of the brain, we have forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. So the forebrain would be from the forehead up to the middle or top of the head. This is also known as cerebrum, a Latin term. Okay, then we also have midbrain, then we also have a hindbrain, which is at the back, okay, the back of the head. That's also sometimes referred to as cerebellum. Okay, each of those parts of the brain have different subparts, many, millions and millions. I mean, I'm exaggerating, okay, but excuse me, many different parts of the brain, and each one of those parts of the brain serves specific function. Some of the functions overlap. Okay, so for example, forebrain has huge responsibility for things like cognitive skills. Okay, so things like language, memory, attention, thinking, okay, complex thinking processes, okay, but it also has other functions as well. The back of the brain, also known as hindbrain or cerebellum, has functions such as, it's responsible for functions such as movement, coordination, balance, and things like that, okay? So you can focus on any of those parts of the brain, okay? So, to move on, I'll just find the PowerPoint to give you a little bit more information. Okay. Right, so what I'll do now, I'm going to give you a little bit of extra information on the lobes. Okay, lobes also form part of the brain, and we have four lobes, one on each side of the brain. So if you look at it this way, the brain is split into two halves. Okay, we have left hemisphere, we have right hemisphere. Okay, and there's a line that runs in the middle, in between. What you also need to know is that the left side of the brain controls everything on the right side of the body, and vice versa. The right side of the brain controls everything on the left side of the body. Okay, so the four lobes are called, okay, frontal lobe here at the front. Then we have temporal lobes, which are on the side of the head, and they are just above temples, okay, just above ears, sorry, near the temples. That's why they call temporal lobes. Then we have occipital lobe, which is at the back of the brain or head, and we also have something called parietal lobe, which is at the top of the head. So to recap, frontal lobe at the front, occipital lobe at the back or hindbrain, parietal lobe at the top, temporal lobes on the side above the ears near the temples. I'm now going to give you some information on divisions of the forebrain. Okay, the forebrain is split into two parts, telecephalon and diencephalon. So each of those has various different functions. Okay, and you can look at that in more detail on the PowerPoint that I've put up for you. Okay. Okay. Um, just find a little bit more information to give you. Okay. Um, let's see. So. Uh, okay. So. In terms of the organization of the central nervous system, which is the brain and spinal cord, a convenient way to visualize how the brain is organized is to imagine it as three structures, each increasing in the complexity of the functions that they subserve. Okay, so at the core is the brain stem. Okay, so that's in the middle, which controls basic aspects of behavior such as breathing, swallowing, digestion, urination, etc. Then alongside is the cerebellum, which controls, and that's at the back of the head, like I said, or the hindbrain. Sometimes it's also referred to as small brain, which controls movement and posture and balance and so on. Wrapped around this core is the limbic system, which is a primitive region responsible behaviors essential to basic survival, such as pain, pleasure, fear, eating, and sex. The outer layer of the brain is the cerebral cortex, which is a thin sheet of neurons dealing with higher order functions such as perception, planning, problem solving, thinking, consciousness, etc. So, what you need to know is that all these different parts of the brain are interconnected. Okay, they have to be connected and interconnected to each other, otherwise the brain and the body would not function. Okay, so I'm going to finish off here, and I will give you more detail in the emails that I will send you. Okay, but just to remind you again, the criterion is very, very broad. You can look at any different part of the brain, but what you'll need to know and what you'll need to do in your assignment is you will need to give the name of that part of the brain. You will need to say where it is in which part of the brain, and you will need to say what the function or functions are of that particular part of the brain. Okay, so for example, frontal lobe you can talk about. You will need to say where it is at the front of the head. You will need to say what functions it serves. Okay, if you want to mention the more inside of the brain, for example, hypothalamus and thalamus, you would do exactly the same. You would mention where they are, which part of the brain they are in, what functions they serve, and that way you can talk about any particular part. Okay, so thank you for listening. Okay, and that's it for now. Okay, bye.